Well, they never told me right away that it was cancer. I really didn't realize what it was. But then when I found out, it sort of hit me, cancer, me.
Probably the first reaction is one of denial or inability to accept such information.
I thought I could have died, It ran through my mind a couple times. But it didn't really bother me because they said, it was curable.
People are reluctant to even say the word death. And I find this situation to be most acute in situations where there is a terminally ill patient.
I expected to feel better, and I don't feel better yet.
When someone knows that death is imminent, it allows them to deal with their own death in their own terms and in terms of how they feel that their family is going to deal with it. Now, if they've accepted the fact and can spend the rest of whatever time they have left doing and communicating things to someone else, only to have them fall on someone who's saying, well, I really don't believe that you're going to die, and buck up and keep a stiff upper lip and everything else like that, that's cheering up the patient, but that's not really dealing with the situation.
My father died when I was very young, and my wife's father died when she was young. But in our own family background, also having come from a rural background, we experience life and death in animals and in family and friends and neighbors, and I grew up in a situation where the cemetery was next to the church, so that in my background, we were used to dealing with the reality of death.
Today, they'll get a call from the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning or something, someone died. Well, that's a death that's removed from the home. It's far away from them, although they're very well conscious and aware of the fact that it's a possibility.
I received a telephone call. It was a nurse, and she asked what religion my child was. I knew that Chris was dying. I knew right then.
So deaths are now, and births are taking place primarily in the sterile atmosphere of hospitals.
Tony stood by her bed and held her hand. The priest stood at the foot of the bed. He's the only one who was crying. I was pacing the floor. The nurses were watching us to see whether we were going to be able to manage this. I think they were afraid that we'd either become hysterical or faint or do something and mess up their intensive care room. Naturally, I was there when she was born, and not too many mothers can be with their child when they die. And I am grateful for the rest of my life for that privilege.
It was in March of '73. Our children had a half day off of school, and I was taking my son fishing. And while he was waiting for a friend to join him, he rode his bike around the corner and had some kind of an accident on the street. Mark was on the Bennett machine at the hospital for about 5 days before he actually died. And so that during that 5 days, you began to internalize the reality.
I think there are predictable stages of responding to loss, things you can expect, things that you can identify and name. The first of these is the sense of shock and denial. Your whole being, your physical, intellectual, spiritual self is programmed to deny the reality of death.
Kind of a sense of foreboding or dread, but I didn't know anything then.
So you kind of vacillated between the reality of everything pointing to the fact that he's dying or will die shortly, or that he will live, and it's just kind of like a dream world.
I was told very honestly that they did not feel that Mark would be able to survive, and yet you still sort of believe in miracles.
You go through a grief process and you're angry at God, especially in this case. Why would you take Chris, who was obviously going to do so much in the world? She was obvious that she was going to be a doer and a server for society.
So hostility is certainly one of the earmarks of the stages of grief.
It was like a selfish feeling, like he said, why did it happen to me when actually it was her that died,
At one point, there will be a strong sense of despair. The person will feel like they just can't go on. Their world has darkened, and they do wish to withdraw.
We felt alone. Terribly, terribly, terribly alone.
The person most assuredly will feel guilty about the relationship that is now severed. And they'll feel guilty not because of the relationship was so poor or they were so bad in it, but rather they'll feel guilty because they recognize that there is now no way of going back and restoring what might have been. I think the guilt stage is really a very positive one because it does suggest that the fact of death has come home to the person.
We make the removal from the hospital or the home to the mortuary here. We use a station wagon, looks just like any other station wagon, and we go to the home and we bring the stretcher in and go to the room and ask the family if they would go to another room in the home where they cannot see us make the removal.
Our training in the areas of psychology and grief therapy, as it is today, which is really an infant science, is somewhat limited.
You know, it has something to do with the big funeral ripoff. They're selling you our $99.95 special casket, and with our special burial services. And
people are really looking to a funeral director for help and counsel at a time of death. They want someone who can coordinate the details and make that portion of it as easy as possible for them.
They make you feel guilty.
Yeah.
If you don't want to buy this casket, they can say, well,
They bring
don't
out-
you care about this person?
your relative will haunt you for the rest
They
of
bring
your
out,
life.
You do for people while they're living, and the time of death is not the time to try to make it up. You can't equate the way you feel about someone or the way you love someone with the amount of money that you spend on them.
Well, you've seen the Egyptian mummies. And of course, they had 79 days in which to embalm a body, which of course is no secret to us, as many people would like us to think. But we can make a body last as long as you can keep moisture away from it. Cosmetics must be done in good taste. In this case, I'm using a water-based cosmetic. The water base works well on easily cosmetized bodies, bodies that aren't too red or too blotchy.
Cosmetizing a body, I think, is important for the living. It's a consideration to the living.
Now this highlighter looks very, very dark down here, and it is. But upstairs with our lilac-colored lights, it will tone it down and will make it look very natural. All funeral directors take note of the part of the casket that no one will see. And they are fully clothed. They wear anything that they would have worn in life. That would include undergarments, hosiery in a woman's case, shoes if the family wishes.
I believe that there's a very positive thing involved with having a casket open. Seeing is believing, and if they can see someone in a death state, it's again a step in their recovery process back to normality in everyday living.
In Judaism, we try to discourage the open casket and the cosmetic art of the undertaker because we feel this is part of denial. We feel that death must be accepted as the reality it is.
You know why they have funerals?
Yeah. Well, because some people might want to see their relatives or friends before they put them in the ground.
Chris died on a Saturday. We had a private funeral at home. Something inside me it was an urge, an uncontrollable urge to bring her home one more time.
It was something that I wanted done. I wanted a funeral for my son for several reasons. Number one, there was the expression of my faith and our hope in the resurrection. Secondly, it is a comfort to have your friends with you at this time of grief. I would want them to be with me in a time of happiness, too, say a wedding.
I don't care to go to wake. I just can't take it. I can't stand it, see my friends,
There was a lady in there. She was shaking him, talking about, wake up. Tell me, wake up.
Everybody else was crying at the wake, and I thought I was crazy because I wasn't.
Well, one of the things that happens early in death is the gathering of the family.
It's a sharing with the family, a celebration, really, of a life has been led.
I think that's terribly important and helpful to the bereaved person in two ways. One, it requires of them to have to tell the story of what's happened. And that is a way of making real the death that has come. Remember I said that people are going through shock and denial, and that this is a way of reinforcing the fact of death. It has really happened when you tell it.
If I have any regrets at all, it's just that I probably wasn't as open to people to give them the chance to talk about Chris as we should have. A few incidents I remember people coming here.
And I think that you should give them the opening to talk about the person who has died.
It really doesn't help me when somebody comes up to comfort me. I just got to do it myself. I'm a loner type of person. If there's something wrong with me, I got to settle it within myself. And when people tried to come up to me and talk to me, I just didn't even want to hear them, you know.
Inside, their heart is aching, and this is all they want to talk about. This is all they're thinking about. And the majority of people will do anything except mention the person that has died. So if you can give them that opening and then just sit back and listen.
The bereaved person begins to have a sense of community, that this is not an experience that they're passing through alone and isolated, but rather that they're part of a group.
Comes after the funeral and after the last casserole is gone and after the flowers have withered. You know that you must make a re-entry into life with meaningfulness and purposefulness, and yet some of that has been temporary or is gone permanently. And it was such a feeling of loss. I still had 2 living children, and yet I rather felt barren with the loss of 1 child.
I'd say sometimes it's kind of almost like you'll see a little thing, or you sit down at the table and see an empty place at the table, and all of a sudden you just feel blue and you'll cry. Or you see a boy on a bicycle and you think of your son, or you see somebody practicing football.
Well, it's always the first, too. The first time you go on vacation without a brother, the first time you do something, the first time Dad went fishing without Mark, I'm sure he felt really down. And whenever you do something for the first time, you just think, oh, what if Mark would have been here? What would he be doing now?
And so the frequency of feeling loss and of crying is much more repetitive in the earlier days and months.
For the first couple months, I really couldn't talk about it, but it's just like anything. It faded, you know. It's lingering still, you know. I can still feel it, but the severe shock, you know, that sort of thing, it's all over with, you know.
I would say the first 6 months are the most intense, and then it kind of lessens and becomes less and less frequent.
But then gradually there's an attempt to return to normal and some kind of normal living. They'll do this very tentatively and at a very preliminary and testing level. What they have realized is that they can't spend all their days in abject despair, that life is going on and that somehow they're going to have to come out of their shell and test out things.
There's no other way. I had to go on. So it's kind of just the will. I've got to go on. You know, that's all there is.
Each person is fashioned in such a way that he or she can and will pass through these stages, and in that passage find some healing in the terrible scars of the loss that they have experienced.
Death is, a lot of people think about death, and it's something that they think about trying to prevent, but it's something that just comes naturally, you know.
I used to have a terrible fear of dying. I think most people do, but I don't have that anymore.
Now, how did you overcome it?
Well, I just don't know. I don't know whether that comes with time or whether you feel like old age has brought that on, or whether you've when you give up your home and your husband and your family's married, well, you just that just comes to you.
The purpose of life then lies in realizing your body as an instrument like a chariot or like a car. You enter into a car and you leave it, but you are not the car.
You think there's a life after death?
No. Yes. Sometimes I do.
It's the one experience which you cannot penetrate until you actually experience it yourself.
The emphasis should be made not onto what happens to the body after death, but what the body does before it dies.
Well, you have to die. The point is to enjoy what you're doing now and try not to hurt anybody in doing it.
But if we believe that God created life, cares for it, then we ought to also believe that he created and cares for our death.
You know, you don't have much time. The 4 years in high school went so fast. Then my last year, I wasn't even there. And I didn't miss it then, but I miss it now, really. And just try to get things done and do what you want to do. It'll help.